Good day, my name is Bluesuit and today I'll be going over my review of the story-driven open-world third-person sci-fi action RPG known as Elex II. In Elex II, you take on the role of Jax, the Beast of Zakor, a brave commander who once saved humanity from the evil powers of the Alb hybrid and must now do so again in the face of certain destruction. The story in Elex II takes place some years after the events of the first game and shows little mercy to newcomers to the story, because as with most of the game, not much is really explained to the player. In fact, if you do pick it up, I'd highly recommend that you at least watch a recap video on the events of the first game, otherwise you're in for a whole lot of information that isn't going to make sense. That being said, due to a series of unfortunate events, Commander Jax loses all of his combat prowess and now barely even knows how to lift a sword. From there, you'll take him through the world of Magalan to unite the various factions of the land into the Sixth Power to conquer this new threat known as the Skyans. The story in Elex II is really one of my favorite parts about it. You discover this new emerging threat that's really strong, and you decide to take it down by allying yourself with one of Magalan's factions. Each of these factions are fun and unique and take residence in a different area of the game world, and they all play a huge part in how the end of the game shakes down. There are 5 factions in total: the Outlaws, who are like a Mad Max style people living in tin shacks in an old crater. The Clerics are a religious, once powerful faction who are regaining strength in an old rundown castle. Then the Albs, an emotionless yet technologically advanced race who have a huge snowy base up in the north. The Berserkers are a more nature-focused group who live on a lush hilltop. And finally, the Morcons, a warrior race living underground worshipping their vicious and brutal god. What I love about this setup is that you have to choose which faction to join, which changes the outcome of the game dramatically, as do many of your decisions in Elex II. Once you join a faction, you'll have access to their special equipment and trainers that let you learn skills specific to their people. In my first playthrough, I decided to go with a heavy two-handed build. It turns out there are a lot of fights you can skip when you kill your enemy with one hit. I didn't really want to join the Morcons because they live in dark caves underground and everyone is obsessed with blood, but doing so allowed me to unlock their abilities that let me hit harder and faster in melee combat. The skill tree is pretty impressive in Elex II, with skills focused on all sorts of different playstyles, from ranged weaponry like magic, bows, and guns, to melee weapons like swords, shields, two-handers, and so on. And each faction even has their own specific branch that you can only access if you join them. This also gives the game an insane amount of replayability, as no 2 playthroughs will ever be the same, with the number of builds you can make and endings you can choose. The one downside to the story, however, is in its delivery. Elex II's animations can occasionally feel pretty outdated, as the characters' wooden expressions rarely ever measure up to their emotional voice acting. It does somewhat kill the immersion, but with otherwise solid writing and voices, I still caught myself getting attached to many of the game's characters. There are even a handful of them that you can recruit to be your permanent followers. While their AI can be questionable at times, the fact that most of them can't be permanently killed makes them a huge asset. And there are skill tree bonuses for players who'd rather go it alone as well. Accompanying the great story is the huge and impressive world of Magalan, a sprawling biome that spans snowy mountaintops, desert ranges, and lush forests. Everywhere from the houses and hilltops, the caves and the craters are all part of the world, and you won't see a single load screen at all except when fast traveling, and even then it's surprisingly fast. I love worlds where you can just walk from one side to the other unabated, but enemies here do not scale with your level, so beware. It is very, very easy to wander into an area where you don't belong and get your throat ripped out by evil space aliens, so save often. I should also mention that I'm a huge fan of the original Gothic from Piranha Bytes, and there are a huge number of nods and Easter eggs to that series to be found in this world. There's also loot literally everywhere, and if you're the type of player who can't walk past something without picking it up, Elex II is going to take you a long time to finish. You don't need to worry about inventory space, however, as there's no limit to what you can carry here. Menus, especially inventory, are a bit cumbersome though, and I often found them as a source of frustration due to how they're laid out. But fortunately, there's a really simple scrap mechanic that does work well. Basically, you mark items as scrap, and whenever you pick up that item again, it'll always go into your scrap pile. And then whenever you get to a merchant, you can just quickly sell all of your scrap at the push of a button. The last really great thing about the map is that they give you this jetpack very early on in the game that can be upgraded in your skill tree. A lot of the game world is built very vertically, and exploring new locations with a jetpack is super freeing, especially when it's fully upgraded and you can just fly around wherever you want to go, even firing your weapons in air. It does make the combat a bit cheesy at times though, as there are many fights that you can just exploit just because your enemy doesn't have a cool jetpack. The last big mechanic that I'd like to talk about before getting onto the negatives is Elex II's loot system. Every enemy can drop any non-armor item that they're carrying, and beasts can even be carved for valuable trophies if you have the appropriate survival skills. At the beginning of the game, you'll usually only find damaged and worn down gear, but through crafting you can improve it greatly. Crafting again requires specific points in your skill tree, but can also allow you to socket your gear, brew potions, press ammunition, and so on. It's an overall rather simple system, but each upgrade always felt like a huge power spike that feels rewarding. Full disclosure, I love Elex II, and I definitely see myself dumping a couple hundred hours into it before I'm through, but it is a decisive game, and there are a couple reasons why some players might really hate it. If you've played a Piranha Bytes game in the past, you probably already know what I'm talking about, but controls are gonna feel pretty clunky at first. Character movement, especially in combat, often feels as wooden as their animations, and getting Jax to do what you want can occasionally be a pain. I once got in a bar fight in the Morcon Grotto, and there were so many bar patrons in the way that the game couldn't figure out who I wanted to attack. Sadly, I ended up swinging at a guard, and they all bludgeoned me to death for it. To wit, yes, you can attack anyone you want in the game at any time, and also, again, save often. The awkwardness of combat becomes much more manageable the more you play though, as you learn how enemies behave and when your openings to attack are. The second and senior issue that I have with Elex II is in its performance. In several dozen hours with the game, I had too many frame drops to count, visual bugs, and even a few full crashes that really let me down even on medium settings. It seems to be the trade-off for having such a huge, open, seamless world, but I definitely hope to see its performance improved in upcoming patches, at least on PC. You can pick up Elex II when it launches on March 1st, 2022 on PlayStation and Xbox for $60 or $50 on PC. It has some distinct performance issues and presentation flaws that hold it back from feeling like a modern AAA experience, but its positives do far outweigh its downsides. It's a huge open world with several playthroughs worth of replayability in an entirely unique world built on strong and addictive RPG elements. So I'm valuing Elex II at $58, and I highly recommend it to fans of traditional open world RPGs, especially if you're already a fan of anything from Piranha Bytes. I hope you enjoy this review of Elex II. Come see me on Twitch where you can watch our reviews in progress. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you thought about it. Until next time.